Hey Man Cave-Ins, this is Bob from the Bob's N-Scale Man Cave, and today is part 6 of how to build a floating shelf railroad. And in this episode we're going to be talking about your DCC and your power distribution out to your bus lines. What kind of things I'm using with mine, and yours could be completely different, but let's see what I've got going on so far. There it is. Well, first off, you need to have a DCC system. In this case, I have an NCE Corporation Power Pro R, which is a radio-controlled Powercab, and there is the receiver and transmitter. And it's hooked up to the cab bus right there. And of course, power supply and so forth. There's some other pieces that go with it, some cords and an interface to plug in a wire controller. Basically, I took the track power. I'm using red and white as my bus line colors from the main power. It's also the main color of all the normal buses. I have blue and white for anything that's a reverse loop. And so I've got 2 reverse loops in here that I have to wire up. And I have the wire coming out of the DCC system. And it goes up and under behind and out through a hole that I drilled through here to hook up to the bus bars. And on the bus bar, if you can see there, I have some 12 gauge, actually 14 gauge ground wire that I just looped around each one of the things. It's a solid piece of wire from this end all the way to this end. And so I did it on both sides. That basically jumpers the white to this side and red to this side. From there, I split it up into kind of districts. And on this left side one is my main bus district. And that goes all the way up to the ceiling. And this one here is going to be the helix. That's a separate district. Basically, a district is when you isolate a whole section of track with a double gap or insulated rail joiners, which I used insulated rail joiners. From these are EB1s from NCE Corporation. They basically are a circuit breaker, and you can control what your circuit will cut out at if it detects a short. I have mine set to the default 2.5 amps. I can always adjust that all the way up to 8 amps if I need to. Comes out of the circuit breaker up to another bus bar, and from here it is split up and goes directly to a AR1 by Digitrax. And also on that same section there, it splits off, goes through a hole here and up to another hole there and back through and around. And it goes all the way up to my main bus. With the AR1, it feeds in, comes back out, and comes in down here. And both of these do that because one AR1 is for the main line when it goes into the reverse loop, and the other one is for the helix side that goes into the other end of the reverse loop. So it's going through 2 different districts. So you basically tie them together, the outputs, try and keep your same color wires connected. It might make a little bit of difference in shorting and stuff like that. And then the output goes to my reverse bus. I'm going to be doing the same thing and a little bit differently with the lower yard, because I have to also connect off of the helix side. So I'm going to be putting another jumper in here somewhere to power another AR1, and also coming off another EB1 that'll be here for the lower yard. And then I'll have another EB1 over here for my turntable roundhouse section, and that will also go up to another AR1. So I've got quite a bit of things to do here. This red and white wire is to my yard bus, and this blue and white one is to my lower reverse loop. And I have the same problem on the yard, where I have up on the upper side where the reverse loop touches two different districts, and so I'm going to have to wire it up like that. I have tested this out and it works perfectly, so I don't see any problems with this at all. Now all this other space over here that I have on this control panel will probably be used for other electronics, like for my servo controllers, and the wiring and everything else that goes for that. I'll be putting a control panel in, probably up in this area. It'll come out to the side. I'll have track, about 4 inches of track right up in there on the outside of here, and so I'll have to have the control panel out a little bit farther than that, so I can hook up switches and buttons and so forth for my layout to work, and all my switches to get switched automatically. So things you will need when you're doing this is some small screwdrivers, some narrow and wide slotted screwdrivers to fit into these. I take the wide ones. These AR1s take the narrow ones. You also need some bus bars, needle nose pliers, a wire stripper, track cutter. This works great on wire too. Screwdrivers, drills, drill bits, wire, different color wire. These happen to be 14 gauge wire. You could go and use 16 gauge, maybe even 20 gauge, actually 18 gauge wire for your applications. But this one, I've got a lot of long distance bus lines, so I need a thicker gauge wire. Going into these AR1s, they don't take 14 gauge wire, they take roughly 18 gauge wire, so you have to cut the stranded wire down a little bit, split it in half, so it will fit inside the holes. Just a little tip. Okay, so here's another tip. When you're going to solder feeders on the bottom of your rail, as you can notice, there's a gap through some of the flex track to help it bend. Well, it's a double gap, so there's no plastic in between on both sides. Well, if you find that, cut one of these sections out so that it slides back and forth, and you make a bigger gap like this. You just slide it on down, and you got a wide piece there to solder in. So just solder to the bottom of the rails, and then make sure it's a good clean solder joint. And then all you do is slide the ties back toward where you can move them to, and so they look kind of even. And so you want to do that. Just cut out a section, at least one tie, if you have to, and it's going to work just fine. When you're done soldering that piece in, I'm going to take a piece of hard solid core wire, electrical wire, because it's easy to punch through this foam. Just going to figure out where I want to put it, punch through the cork and or just the foam on both sides, and thread your wire down through the cork down to the bottom. where you want to connect it to your bus. And then underneath that first layer of foam, I have my bus lines right up here near the front. And I can just wire my track right to these bus lines with the suitcase connectors. So we're going to take a look at that and show you how it's all done. Here I'm going to cut out the tie spacers, and so I can slide these ties down out of the way so I can get a good place to solder some wire to it, each rail. Just cut out what you need and just slide them over. In this case I cut over, I think, a couple of them, and then put some flux on there on each rail. Don't need a lot. And then cut out your 22 gauge solid wire to the length you need. Strip the insulation off just a little bit, is all you need. Bend the wire to make it fit on the rail, and in this case I clamped it down to a board so I can keep the wire and the track and everything in place and not moving, sort of like a third hand. Apply some heat and a little bit of solder onto the wire, trying to keep it all on the bottom of the rail. Don't try and go on the inside at all, because that'll derail your cars. And in this case the wire was bending up a little bit, so I could use a screwdriver to push it down and heat up the solder again, and it matches to the rail. Now I did the other side. Remove your clamps and check to see if you have a good tight soldering connection. And then I placed the rail where I'm going to mount it, and I need to mark where I'm going to put the holes. And I used a 14 gauge ground wire to use as a punch, and I poke right through the cork and the foam all the way through the bottom. This is 2 inches of foam, and made enough a big enough hole and round enough to slide the wire through. So make sure your wire is not wrapped around each other and everything else, so you can poke them through the holes to the bottom. Once you get it in there, reach underneath or tip over the foam, however you're gonna do it, and pull the wires through, making sure they're not all kinked up, and otherwise you gotta pull them back up and straighten them out. Once they're in there, kind of leave them up a little bit and test fit it, make sure it's all fit in there, rearrange as needed. Then I use this Liquid Nails clear adhesive that you can get from Menards, or actually you can get from Home Depot for $3.97, about 2.5 ounces, and it goes on pretty great, and it holds the track in place, and it comes up if you have to ever redo it. So I took a straightening tool that I also have, put it on the rail, made sure that everything is lined up right, and poked the Woodland Scenics track nails, or foam nails, into the track to hold it down to the adhesive. It keeps it in place. You can also put extra weight on there, put a 2x4 on there or something, or some other weights you may have lying around. And then I took all the wires and used the blue suitcase connectors to crimp onto the bus wire, and the purple ones to clamp into the suitcase connector. Make sure you get all your whites and everything else together, and as you can see, you don't have a crossover of polarity. Keep your whites together, your reds together, or whatever color you're using. And in this case the white was on the outside and the red is on the inside of the circle. There you go. Well, Mancavians, this concludes our part 6 of how to build a floating shelf railroad. And this was the electrical episode where I showed you DCC system, my breakout panel for wiring up circuit breakers and AR1s and eventually other electrical items. We're also talking about how to solder feeders onto the bottom of your track and slide them in through your foam or wood if you have that, either one, and hook them up to your suitcase connectors. If you like what you saw here, go ahead and subscribe, and you'll be notified of new videos that come out. Or you can also follow me by clicking on my links down below in the comment section for Facebook page and a Google Plus page, and follow me on Twitter. So until next time, Mancavians, happy model railroading and stay off the tracks. Bye.